My name is Jenny Kalas, and I'm the Communications Director here at the Oregon Department of Energy. And before I turn things over to Director Benner, I want to spend a minute just orienting you to the WebEx platform for anyone who hasn't used it before. Members of the public are signed on as attendees, so your cameras are off and you are muted, but we do want to hear from you, so we have a few different tools that we're using today, and we hope you will weigh in. On the right side of the WebEx window, you should see a few tools. Under participants, you'll be able to see the various panelists who are signed in today. And then below that, there is a chat function. And within that chat function, there's a little drop-down window that says To, where you can choose who sees your message. So please note when you're directing messages to all panelists or to a specific panelist or to everyone to share your thoughts. And then below chat, you should see a Q&A box. And if you have questions as folks are presenting, please feel free to pose your questions there. My colleague Casey Radcliffe is keeping an eye on Q&A and chat, and she will direct questions to our staff who are signed in to answer, or we may answer some of those live as we get through the presentation. And then we'll also have some time at the end for questions that have come in. You'll see I'm sharing the presentation today, and before we dive in, I want to demonstrate one more tool that we're going to use today, and that is a polling function. So throughout the presentation, you'll see opportunities to weigh in, and a little window should pop up with some options for answering this question, and that is where you're joining us from today. So please choose your answer, and then don't forget to hit submit down there at the very bottom, and we'll wait about 30 seconds, about 15 more seconds for everybody to weigh in, and we'll see where everyone's joining us from today. About 5 more seconds if you haven't answered yet. And I think Stacy will share the responses. And it looks like we've got quite a few folks in the Willamette Valley, Central Oregon, Southern Oregon, great, Northeast Oregon, one from out of state. Thanks so much for tuning in to hear more about energy in Oregon. That's great. So you'll see that window pop up once in a while, and we'll give you a warning with a slide with the question, and we hope you'll share your thoughts with us. And with that, I will turn things over to our director, Janine Benner.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jenny. And thank you to everyone who's been able to join us this afternoon. My name is Janine Benner, and I'm the director at the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'll be your MC this afternoon. If I could get the next slide, Jenny, we'll show you our agenda for the afternoon. You'll see that we want to spend some time talking through a few sections of our 2020 Biennial Energy Report with a special focus on energy and climate in Oregon. Probably don't need to tell this audience, but energy and climate are inextricably linked. Our climate affects energy just as energy affects our climate. And about 80% of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions come from the amount and type of energy that Oregonians use every day. But while energy is a contributor to climate change, it can also be part of the solution, from clean and renewable energy to efficiency to conservation. And that's what we want to talk about mostly today. So as I'll show in a moment, part of the Department of Energy's mission is to advance solutions that shape an equitable clean energy transition, to be sure that we don't leave any Oregon families and communities behind. As Jenny mentioned, we'll have some questions for the audience throughout the presentation. This is our first time doing polling like this quite so extensively, so bear with us, and we're really excited to hear what you think, and really hope that you'll take the time to share with us what you feel are the most important issues around climate change, clean energy, and more. Your feedback will help us better understand what's important to Oregonians, and it will also help guide us as we turn to development of our next energy report in 2022. Next slide, please. So before we dive in, the Oregon Department of Energy and its staff would like to express our respect to the Native Americans of Oregon, who have had a relationship with this land from time immemorial that continues to this day. It's impossible to understand today's energy landscape without acknowledging and understanding the rich culture and contribution of these people and communities. Next slide, please. All right, so the Oregon Department of Energy, or ODO, as you might hear us call ourselves, recently updated our vision and mission statement, and that's what you should be seeing on this slide here. You can also see how we articulated our work into the 5 categories under what we do. And this is really about how we deliver on our mission and the value that we bring to Oregonians. Now, the Biennial Energy Report is a key product that the agency uses to help Oregonians make informed decisions about energy. And it's also emblematic of several of the bullets you see under what we do. It's a central place for Oregon's energy data, information and analysis, and can be used for energy education, technical assistance, and helping to find solutions to Oregon's energy challenges. Next slide, please. So why did we write this report? In 2017, the legislature passed HB 2343, which charged the department with developing a report every 2 years to inform local, state, regional, and federal energy policy development and energy planning and investments. In this report, which is based on analysis of data and information collected and compiled by the Department of Energy, provides a comprehensive review of energy resources, policies, trends, and forecasts, and what they mean for Oregon. Next slide, please. So here's a snapshot of all the topics covered in the report, along with the link to read it online. And if you visit the report online and come to this table of contents, each of these topics is a link, so you can easily navigate to the topic you want to read more about, if you don't want to read all 612 pages of it. Some of you might be familiar with the 2018 report, which provided deep policy dives on a handful of important energy topics: climate change, renewable energy, transportation, energy resilience, energy efficiency, and consumer protection. And as you can hopefully tell from this table of contents, the 2020 report takes a slightly different approach based on recommendations from stakeholders to provide shorter briefs on a wider array of energy topics. Each topic is self-contained and can be read either in the context of the report or on its own, kind of like a magazine, a very long magazine. In the first section that we want to cover today, we call Energy by the Numbers. So here to walk through some basics is one of ODO's facilities engineers, Stephanie Cruz.
Thank you, Janine. So the Energy by the Numbers is what I like to think of as the data-heavy section of the report. And this is really a snapshot of where we're at and where we've been. Next slide, please. This first chart is lovingly referred to as the Sankey within ODO, but it's an energy flow diagram, which visually summarizes how energy is produced, imported, and consumed here in Oregon. So Oregon utilizes a diverse collection of resources for energy, and this chart demonstrates what portion is produced in state. As you can see, a good portion of the production here in Oregon comes from green energy resources like hydro, wind, solar, and biomass. And a good portion of our petroleum-based products are imported into the state. The data is based on 2018, and the numbers are all represented in trillions of BTUs, or British thermal units. And the line thicknesses in this chart roughly represent how much energy is flowing in each of these steps. So the chart moves from left to right and either go through electricity generation or directly to the sectors for consumption. In electricity generation, resources are converted to electricity, and in every step there is waste energy that is produced in the process of transforming energy from the raw materials to a useful form of energy. So the waste energy includes any of the energy that's not harnessed between the point of extraction and the point of use. And then the use energy down in the bottom right corner of this chart represents the energy that actually is put to a purpose here in Oregon. Next slide, please. Here we have the Oregon's energy expenditures by sector over the last 50 years or so. And the chart shows what each sector spends on energy. As you can see, energy costs have been increasing over time, as well as experiencing some overall volatility. This is despite a decreasing trend in energy consumption since about 2006. As shown here, the transportation sector actually experiences the most price volatility. Next slide, please. These two charts come from Oregon's electricity resource mix. And this is where ODO actually works with some of our partners and utilities to put together exactly what resources are used to generate the electricity that we consume in Oregon. On the left-hand side of the chart here, you can see the 2018 electricity resource mix, showing that our electricity primarily comes from hydropower, coal, and natural gas, followed by wind and nuclear. And then all of the other resources like solar and geothermal are significantly smaller in comparison. And the chart to the right shows how the mix has changed over time, showing from 2012 to 2018. And from here you can see how hydro varies year over year based on the available production, water availability, rainfall, snow runoff, and many other factors. You can see that coal has been decreasing while natural gas has been increasing. And if you look real closely, you can see that solar has actually been increasing. But this data only represents the electricity we consume in Oregon. It does not include resources that we generate and then export outside of Oregon to our neighboring states. And if you are curious about finding more information on this, you can look up your utility-specific electricity resource mix on our website, as well as a whole lot of more additional information around this topic. Next slide, please. This chart shows Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions over time. This data comes from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. And you can see here that although Oregon has taken many steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions between both policy decisions and energy efficiency work, we are not currently on track to hit the 2020 interim greenhouse gas emission reduction goal, which was to reduce emissions by about 10% below 1990 levels. You can also see that transportation sector emissions have been on the rise since 2014 from this chart. And while transportation is the largest sector, there are many significant sources of emissions, and they all represent opportunities for greenhouse gas emission reductions. If you'd like to see additional detail on this data, there are a few more granular charts where you can see emissions by resource and a few other views in the Energy by the Numbers chapter of BER, which you can see on our website. Next slide, please. And I'm going to hand it back to Janine.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. I'm looking in the Q&A box to see if we have any questions that have come in for Stephanie, and I don't see any yet, but if you have one, feel free to type it there in the Q&A box, and my colleague Casey will make sure it gets answered. So now we have another question for you before we move on to our next section. You will see on this slide, and a window should pop up soon so you can select your answer. So we would like to know what your biggest concern is about Oregon's energy sector. And if the answer that you have isn't here on this list, please go ahead and add it to the chat. Also, for folks that might have missed it, I put a link to Oregon's electricity resource mix in the chat, so you can see more details on what Stephanie presented. And don't forget to hit submit after you've made your selection. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. Looks like people on this call care a lot about greenhouse gas emissions, but also about a number of other energy-related issues. So energy costs showing up, access to energy after an emergency, certainly something we've all been thinking about recently. And I can't see the chat on my screen at the moment, but I will check to see if anybody had any other answers as well. Okay, so thanks again for sharing your thoughts on that. And now that we've shared a baseline of information from the report, we're going to cover 3 broad topics from the 2020 Energy Report: climate change, clean and renewable energy, and a consumer focus on energy efficiency, energy burden, and alternative fuel vehicles. So next up, we have ODO's Senior Climate Policy Analyst, Maya Buchanan, and she will discuss Oregon and climate change. Take it away, Maya.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So as you likely know, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, what they do is they trap the sun's heat in the Earth's atmosphere. And this well-known term, the greenhouse effect, it's changing Earth's climate in many ways. It increases air and water temperatures, it shifts precipitation patterns, and it amplifies extreme weather events. Some of those we've seen more than we would have liked to this last year. In Oregon specifically, temperatures have risen already by approximately 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the beginning of the 20th century, and the pace of warming has been accelerating since the 1970s. Temperatures are expected to continue to rise during all 4 seasons, and annual average temperatures in Oregon are expected to rise by nearly 4 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050, which is just a few decades away compared to the 1980s. So this effect has been well monitored by many scientists the world over, and we're seeing effects at home. So I'm going to be touching on some of those today. Warmer temperatures, as I noted, they provoke extreme weather events. So these increase the frequency, this means that they're increasing the frequency and intensity of heat waves, heavy downpours, droughts, and wildfires. So for example, some illustrations of this are that, climate is increasing, how dry our summers are, it's extending fire seasons, and of course, increasing wildfire risk. Recent research from the state climatologists has shown that climate change contributed to the severity of the 2020 Labor Day fires, which remarkably burned more area of the Oregon Cascades than had burned in the previous 36 years combined, and very likely exceeded area burned in any one single year for at least the past 120 years. So really interesting and really humbling thoughts. Next slide, please. So the type and amount of energy we use, as Janine noted, affects both the severity of climate change, and in turn that affects the severity of impacts to our energy systems. These climate hazards, they can damage and degrade critical infrastructure, and they interrupt planning processes. So all of that can threaten the availability, the reliability, and affordability of energy resources. So I'll walk through just a couple examples of this. For one, hotter summer temperatures can increase the need for air conditioning. And in Oregon, as you know, not all housing has air conditioning, especially older homes. And lower income families may not be able to afford air conditioning, and this can result in higher energy costs and energy burden, which will be a topic discussed later on. With wildfires and flooding from heavy precipitation, this can damage things like power lines. It can increase service interruptions like brownouts and blackouts. And one example is from February 2020, when Oregon declared a state of emergency after a really extreme rainfall event happened in eastern Oregon, northeastern Oregon, where the precipitation was up to 400% of normal. And this covered some areas in 4 to 6 inches of mud. So along those lines, several roads and highways can be blocked. From this event in particular, Interstate 84 was closed for 6 days, which is hard to imagine. Extensive damage to local utilities, electrical wiring systems. Nearly 200 poles and 42 miles of electricity lines were affected, and this resulted to a loss of power to nearly 200 households. So one individual event can obviously wreak quite a bit of havoc, and having more of those really adds up cumulatively across the state. Speaking about roads being blocked, the disruption of transportation fuels is a result of that too. And a lot of these fuels are transported via major roads throughout Oregon. So when you have extreme precipitation, that can result in mudslides, and it can back up our systems. One example of this was after the September 2020 wildfires, the Detroit area of Oregon was just able to get a gas station up and running in March, thanks to efforts by our agency, the state and county reps, and the fuel industry working together. Assessing Oregon's energy vulnerability to various climate hazards really can inform which actions we can take, where and when, to help reduce these risks. And these actions are typically known as adaptation or resilience actions. And ODO is currently developing a comprehensive climate vulnerability assessment of Oregon's energy sector to help inform this resilience planning across the state. So stay tuned for more information on that, and the assessment hopefully will provide a strong foundation to help identify gaps and opportunities so that investments can be made that maximize community energy resilience, and also serve as a template for other sectors or jurisdictions. Next slide, please. All right, now we're talking about mitigation actions. So these, on the other hand, are actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and they help reduce the severity of climate change. As shown by Stephanie on an earlier slide, the amount of greenhouse gases released by energy systems really varies greatly. In the energy sector, mitigation actions include technologies and resources really that, they're focused on emitting fewer greenhouse gases. That's how we think of them, as mitigation oriented. And this is a topic that my colleague John Cornwell will discuss in more detail. Next slide, please. So transitioning to a cleaner energy resource system will involve technologies that not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also provide a series of other benefits to local communities, such as healthier air, and new economic opportunities. So the 2020 Biennial Energy Report outlines sections that cover a wide array of these topics. So some of these to draw your attention to are what I referred to earlier, the climate vulnerability assessment section. So that includes information on key climate risks that are facing energy systems across the state, and it outlines the process of conducting an assessment. The wildfire mitigation planning section examines various efforts underway to help increase resilience to wildfires in Oregon. And the climate change update section gives an overview of the state's current goals, recent climate-related policies and actions taken not only by large companies, tribes, and local governments in Oregon to reduce emissions. So thank you very much. I'll pass it along.
All right, thank you so much, Maya. Just going to, well, first let's go to another question for attendees. Now that we've heard some pretty sobering information from Maya on climate change, you'll see our next question on this slide, and that window should pop up so you can take the poll. Let us know what you think should be Oregon's top priority for addressing climate change in the energy sector. So you'll have a minute to answer this. And again, don't forget to hit submit after you make your selection. And if you don't see your top priority on this list, feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, we're just waiting for the time to wrap up. Okay, there we go. So looking at the answers to this question about the top priority for addressing climate change in the energy sector, it looks like a lot of folks following the fact that transportation emissions are increasing, a lot of support for adopting clean energy requirements, adaptation, making clean energy options more affordable. Great, really appreciate folks' answers here. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Casey to ask a few questions, or to see if anybody has any questions in the Q&A box.
Thanks, everyone. I want to say thanks for the people who additionally put some information in the chat of some areas of interest during the poll. We saw some additional areas of interest that include energy efficiency, renewable construction, and small modular nuclear reactors of a concern, and also some interest in going back to the chart we saw earlier, Jenny, if you don't mind, back to slide 12 with our greenhouse gas emissions over time. So I'm wondering, Maya and Stephanie, and I think everyone did a great job of tying, where does the electricity sector come over into greenhouse gas emissions? If we could distinguish a little bit in the categories here, we know that the orange band, the sector that says residential and commercial, also use electricity and natural gas. So maybe explaining for at least this data where those delineations are made. So does residential and commercial include the electricity and natural gas, or are they set up separate when it comes to emissions versus what we were maybe talking about with the electricity consumption?
So I can take that one. In this chart, the electricity is handled separately. Electricity and natural gas are handled separately from the sector consumption. However, if you want to dive into the sectors only, in the Energy by the Numbers chapter of the Berg, kind of towards the end, there's a whole section on this data, and you can see it broken down by sectors without the electricity and natural gas being separate, as well as you can see a breakdown completely by resource. So natural gas, coal, hydro, wind. Well, hydro doesn't generate emissions, but different resources. So this chart, as I said, the electricity actually is kind of backed out of the residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural sectors.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I'll put a link in the chat to those sections of the Energy by the Numbers report for those two different breakdowns. And then maybe for the group, larger group, we had a question about, this chart provides us a really good example of where that line needs to go to hit the 2050 goal. Has there been any analysis of how our electricity mix in specific would need to be adjusted to kind of follow this same tracking to our 2050 goal?
Casey, this is Janine. I'd be happy to take that one. The short answer is no, Odo has not put together what the electricity mix would need to look like to get to the 2050 goal. There have been a number of studies both in Oregon and regionally and nationally that look at some options for getting to the 2050 goal, but there are so many options and a lot of it depends on the market and what's available. So it's not something that the ideal mix is not something that we've put together, but I think there have been some studies that identify various ways in which it could be done. And with that, I'll pause and see if any of my colleagues would like to add anything to that response.
I will just add, if you are curious about which resources are contributing to emissions in the electricity portion of this chart, the ERM, which was linked in the chat, has a tab on it that shows the emissions by resource from electricity generation for consumption in Oregon. So you can kind of hone in on what the sources are. And as you'd expect, coal and natural gas are the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in our electricity mix.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for those questions. Okay, so we are going to move on then to my colleague, John Cornwell, one of our senior policy analysts. and he will discuss clean and renewable energy policies, and then we'll dive in to cover some of our energy technology and resource reviews. And it's going to be a choose your own adventure because the audience will get to choose which of those resource reviews he's going to cover. So John, go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Janine. And thanks to everyone attending today. This is a great turnout and it's really exciting to talk to you all. So as we've heard from Stephanie and Maya, in Oregon, we continue to use fossil fuels for much of our energy needs. And this in turn affects and is affected by climate change, as well as having other public health and environmental impacts. So this raises the question of how Oregon can transition to a clean energy system. And importantly, how do we do this in a way that's equitable, affordable, reliable, and responsibly balances energy needs and impacts in our communities now, as well as for future generations as well. So addressing this challenge will take a range of policies and actions on both the supply side, for example, actions related to how we generate and transport energy, as well as actions on the demand side, for example, how we can use energy more efficiently. And the Biennial Energy Report has a lot of great information on a whole range of topics related to this. But today I'm going to talk specifically about two topics related to clean and renewable energy that can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and make Oregon more energy independent going forward. So first of all, I'm going to provide a summary of two important policy tools. So there's clean electricity standards and renewable portfolio standards. And then, as Janine mentioned, we'll work together to review a handful of key renewable and clean electricity technologies that you and the audience are going to get to choose. So first, I'll move on to renewable and clean electricity standards. So electricity standards or electricity portfolio standards, they're sometimes called, have emerged over the past decade and a half as a key policy tool, particularly at the state level for promoting adoption of renewable and clean energy resources. They're what is known as market-based policies that require retail electricity suppliers like electric utilities or electric service suppliers in Oregon as well to get a minimum amount of electricity that they sell to their customers from a set of eligible renewable or clean resources. And typically compliance with these targets is tracked by issuing certificates, typically often called or generally called renewable energy certificates. There are two sort of main flavors of these electricity standards. There's renewable portfolio standards like we have in Oregon, and then clean energy standards. And I'll go into a bit more detail in a moment about the differences between those. But as you can see from this map, renewable and clean energy policies have been widely adopted by states all across the nation, with some exceptions in the southeast there. And on this map, blue states are states with a renewable portfolio standard, which includes Oregon, and green states are states with a clean energy standard. You'll also see that there are some states there with green or with both colors. So those states where they may have a combination of these policies or in some cases a goal rather than a standard in one area and a standard in the other. And in total, there are 30 states plus the District of Columbia that have an RPS, a renewable portfolio standard like Oregon. And then there are 5 states that have clean energy standards. This is as of September of last year. So there have been a couple of changes in the last few months with some additions and some stumbling blocks as well in some cases. But one important thing to remember is that none of these electricity standards is the same across states. Each of these states set different targets, different timeframes, and have different suites of eligible resources. But they've, renewable portfolio standards, which we have a bit more history in, have been, but also clean energy standards have been important for promotion and deployment of renewable energy, with the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab reporting that at least 45% of renewable energy development since the year 2000 can be attributed to renewable portfolio standards. As this map points out, historically renewable portfolio standards are more common, but clean electricity standards have been gaining momentum over the past few years. And so now I'll dive into what the difference is. We can move to the next slide. Great. So the primary goal of renewable portfolio standards, like we have in Oregon, is to increase the development of new renewable energy resources. And to do this, a renewable portfolio standard establishes a target percentage of a jurisdiction's electricity that must come from a set of eligible renewable resources. These policies also often have requirements about the age of a facility. So typically allowing only newer facilities to be eligible in order to encourage new development of renewable projects. And while reduction of greenhouse gas emissions is related to renewable development, reducing greenhouse gas emissions is not typically the explicit goal of these policies. It's the primary goal or stated goal is development of renewable projects. Obviously greenhouse gas emissions come along with that, but it's more of a secondary or implicit goal of an RPS. So Oregon, as I've mentioned, and I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar know, Oregon has a renewable portfolio standard. And in fact, Oregon was one of the first states to adopt a renewable portfolio standard when it established the RPS back in 2007. Initially, the RPS required the state's largest utilities to provide 25% of retail sales of electricity from eligible renewable resources by 2025. In 2016, the Oregon Clean Electricity and Coal Transition Plan increased the RPS requirement to 50% by 2040, with interim goals along the way, as is shown on the graph to the left here. You can see the increase in targets in orange that came about through the Oregon Clean Electricity and Coal Transition Plan. The figure on the right shows eligible resources under Oregon's RPS, which is fairly typical of RPSs around the country. It includes wind, solar, biomass and biogas, as well as geothermal. Oregon's RPS does allow some hydropower from efficiency upgrades to existing facilities or specific low-impact hydropower projects. And it also, another eligible resource is hydrogen derived from renewable resources, but we don't have any of those facilities currently in Oregon, although there's potential in the future. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, while RPS policies have been more commonly adopted around the country, recently an emerging policy that's gaining momentum both at the state level and potentially at the federal level is the Clean Electricity Standard, sometimes also called the Clean Energy Standard. And there are two primary differences between a renewable and a clean electricity standard. The first is what the primary goal of the policies are. I mentioned before, RPS policies have a primary objective of increasing renewable energy deployment, with greenhouse gas emissions being a secondary objective, whereas a clean electricity standard takes a more technology neutral approach and emphasizes greenhouse gas reductions over specific technology deployments. And then that leads me to the second primary difference, which is that suite of eligible resources. So a clean electricity standard sets, again, a target percentage of a jurisdiction's electricity that must come from eligible resources. And then these are clean or zero or low carbon emitting resources. As I mentioned, every policy across the country is designed slightly differently, but eligible resources typically will include that same set of renewable resources, but also low or zero emitting resources, like more extensive inclusion of hydropower, natural gas, or other carbon emitting resources that are equipped with carbon capture and sequestration technologies, or in some cases, nuclear power. So similar to the RPS Clean Energy Standard targets are typically measured in terms of the percent of retail electricity supplied. But in some cases, these policies may be designed in a way that sets specific carbon emission targets rather than electricity procurement targets. So for example, a policy might set a zero emissions target for electricity for a specific year in the future. Next slide, please. Finally, on electricity standards, there's another emerging trend in these policies, which is a move towards setting substantially stronger targets. Since Oregon updated the RPS in 2016 to a 50% goal by 2040, there has been a trend toward 100% targets, with several states adopting 100% clean or 100% renewable targets. These states are highlighted here on this map in the dark green. And so, for example, our neighbors, Washington and California, have both recently adopted 100% clean electricity goals, both setting a target date of 2045 for reaching that goal. And if you want to learn more about these policies, as well as technologies to help reach them, the Biennial Energy Report has some detailed Energy 101 and policy brief sections on these topics. But speaking of technologies, that brings me to our next topic, which I'm excited about, being a both being an energy nerd, but also a child of the 80s who loved Choose Your Own Adventure books. So the Biennial Energy Report has over 20 technology review sections that provide a detailed description of electricity generation and many other technologies. But obviously that's too many for us to talk about today. So choose your own adventure. So we're going to ask you to select the top 3 energy technologies you're interested in hearing about today. Then I'll take the top 3 winners and go into more detail about each of them. I'll talk about how they work, how it's used in Oregon, and what the potential is for future use in Oregon. So I think you should see a survey question now, and I'll give you a minute or so to select. I'm very excited to see the results.
And just as a reminder, if we are not going to cover today one of the topics that you were interested in, you can read all about it in the Biennial Energy Report. So you won't get to hear John's lovely voice describe it to you, but you will get to read about it. These and a number of other technology reviews.
Great. So looks like we've got energy storage, carbon capture and sequestration technologies. Oh, good. There's not I thought there was a tie for a second. So, and marine hydrokinetic technologies. Great. So I will start with energy storage. Great. So there are many different. Oftentimes we think now when we're thinking about energy storage, we frequently think about batteries, but there are many different technologies that can store and discharge electricity. You've got mechanical storage technologies that make use of gravity or kinetic forces. You've got thermal storage that makes use of heating or cooling of materials. Chemical storage, which makes use of chemical and electrochemical reactions like batteries, and then electromagnetic storage, is another sort of area of technologies. Some of these technologies are relatively new, such as hydrogen storage, while others are more mature, like pumped hydro storage, lead acid batteries, etc. While pumped hydro storage has the most capacity nationally, as I'm sure many on the webinar know, lithium-ion batteries have really become the prominent form of energy storage, both in across many different uses, but in terms of electricity, the electricity system, utility scale storage uses lithium-ion batteries, as well as residential storage. And lithium-ion batteries account for about 88% of new storage additions nationally in the last decade. As you can see on the chart on the bottom right, much of this increase in adoption is due to advances in the technology and associated cost reductions that have led to more widespread usage of lithium-ion batteries in consumer goods and electric vehicles, but then also for grid applications or applications in people's homes and businesses. And as you can see there on the right, there's a pretty strong correlation between battery costs on the left axis, or in the orange line, and deployment on the right axis. On the grid side, or utility side, energy storage can provide a lot of additional capacity to the grid, and can afford electricity providers with many different opportunities to more flexibly manage generation and their transmission and distribution systems. And it can also play a valuable role in decarbonising the grid by optimising the generation from renewable resources, or resources that have varying levels of carbon emissions, and providing fast-acting supplies of electricity to potentially offset the use of natural gas peaker plants, for example, and for the integration of renewable energy resources. Residential battery storage systems are large rechargeable batteries designed to store and deliver electricity to a home, and controls allow the batteries to provide, for example, power to a home during a power outage, or to supplement electricity use in the home, or can be paired with solar installations on a home to take more advantage of the electrons generated from those solar panels. And in some cases, where customers agree to allow utility access to the batteries, they could also be used by utilities to support grid operations. So while Oregon is currently ranked 24th among states in terms of storage capacity, so the boxes at the top of the chart here show that Oregon currently has one utility scale storage system of 5 megawatts and 291 residential systems with capacity of about 670 kilowatts. There is a large volume of storage being planned. So the total capacity of storage under construction as of the end of last year was around 430 megawatts. So we're on the verge of seeing a substantial deployment of that technology. All right. And then I'll move to number 2, carbon capture and sequestration. So carbon capture and sequestration, or carbon capture and storage, is another term that you might hear, is the process of capturing or separating carbon dioxide from energy-related and also industrial emission sources, and then transporting that removed CO2 somewhere where it can be stored, typically in geological formations for long-term isolation from the atmosphere. Another term that you'll see incorporated is utilization as well. So there's also potential applications for using CO2 in industrial processes. So carbon capture and storage is an emerging technology. It has the potential to prevent a large amount of carbon dioxide generated by fossil fuel power from being released into the atmosphere. It's the sort of vision for carbon capture and sequestration is that it's most suitable for large stationary emission sources of CO2, coal and natural gas power plants, ethanol plants, cement, industrial plants, so cement plants, refineries, iron and steel plants, etc. So the there's many energy experts and as well as the IPCC, the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, you have found that adding CCS to fossil fuel power plants could be a really important tool to help decarbonize and meet our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, and particularly to achieve net zero emissions. There are currently cases where CCS has been deployed and with coal-fired power plants and natural gas combined cycle power plants. And there's an expectation that that market will expand in the next few years. But the main barriers to CCS really include, at the moment, high capital and costs and operation and maintenance costs of carbon capture and storage projects, and a lack of a price on carbon to provide additional market value of CCS activities. And lastly, I think marine hydrokinetic. Thank you. So marine hydrokinetic energy technologies capture energy from the movement of water in ocean waves, tides, currents, or also heat energy in ocean waters and convert this energy into electricity. So wave energy technologies, for example, extract energy from surface waves or from pressure fluctuations just below the surface. And example of such a technology is an oscillating water column, which uses the rise and fall of waves to push air through a turbine. These technologies are still in early development. The largest operational grid-connected facility in the world at the moment is a 3-megawatt facility in Sweden. And there are currently no large-scale grid-connected wave energy facilities in the United States. However, the PacWave South facility, which depicted here on the image on the right-hand side, is going to be the largest grid-connected wave energy test facility in the world and the first of its kind in the United States, and it becomes operational in 2022 and is projected to have a capacity of 20 megawatts. There are other marine technologies as well, tidal or current energy technologies, dams, tidal barrages, etc. So these are all interesting and exciting technologies that we may see down the line. I think that's my 3.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was quite an adventure. Learned a lot there. I know there's been a lot of Q&A happening, and I think Casey is getting most of those questions answered by our experts, but I will pause to ask Casey if there's any that you would like to ask John live right now.
Thanks. I think one thing that we could maybe just hit on is, John, do you know where we can find more information on the amount of storage that utilities are planning on, and how storage is getting considered with other factors around grid modernization and improving reliability?
Sure. There's for Oregon specifically, as we want understanding more about energy storage deployment, there's a lot of information from the utilities in their integrated resource plans. And then on a broader scale, there's information at the Energy Information Agency for national level statistics on storage deployment. And then the national labs have a lot of great information about the trends in energy storage technology, what we might see in the future.
And I'll add, if you look at the utility scale storage technology review on the Biennial Energy Report, there's also a list of approved or proposed utility scale energy storage projects in Oregon, some of which we are looking at as part of the Energy Facility Siting Council, and some of which aren't within FSEC jurisdiction, but are there on that list. So hopefully you will find that helpful as well. Casey, anything else?
I think just one more resource question. You know, John, I think you covered really nicely some of the non-energy implications and considerations, especially with emerging technologies related to offshore technology. Are there some resources or places along with our technology review that can help Oregonians and others learn more about considerations like environmental factors and wildlife?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one that researchers and and certainly folks involved with the PacWave project are taking very seriously. The Oregon State University has some great repositories of information, and there's actually one great place to go would also again be the Biennial Energy Report. The appendices, as well as the references section to the marine hydrokinetic section, has a lot of great resources and links to those resources.
Thank you so much, John.
Okay, great. Well, again, if you didn't hear about the technology or resource you're interested in, you can read about it in the Energy Report. And we're also going to be working on setting up another webinar this summer that will focus on those 23 technology and resource reviews. So in addition to what you heard about today, there will be other ones as well. And now we're moving on to our next question for you, which is on this slide. So this time we'd like to hear your top priority for encouraging a cleaner energy sector. Question is, what should the state focus on if we want a cleaner energy sector as our outcomes? And you'll see on this poll a few different options that and tools that the state has. Feel free to put in the chat if you have some other ideas that aren't on here. And again, don't forget to hit submit once you make your selection. So we'll give folks a few minutes or a minute to fill out this poll.
And thank you for everyone for providing your questions and written responses. Just a reminder, if you hit those three little button icons, there's a Q&A function, and you can actually put your questions in there and I can assign and provide responses. And then in the chat function, in the to section, if you choose everyone as the option, that will go to our full group instead of just our host who is heroically managing our polling, but I can help assign and manage your questions from there. So the Q&A and then the chat selection of everyone, you may need to scroll down a little bit to see that option. And as Janine mentioned, any that we're not able to get to, I'm recording and we'll make sure to provide some additional resources. Thank you for all of the great questions and thinking on these topics.
Thank you, Casey. And I see that we have closed our poll. Looks like a lot of people don't know what they think the state should focus on, but there is some interest in market transformation, educating consumers, which we like to hear because that's one of the main things that we do. Casey or Stacy, any answers in the chat that you want to highlight? Okay, well, moving on to our final section. We want to cover this afternoon information in the biennial energy report about Oregon consumers. So we have a few presenters for this section who will talk about energy efficiency and use, energy burden, and Oregon's electric vehicles. And we'll let them all go through their presentations and then we'll pause for questions. But of course, don't hesitate to put your questions in the Q&A box as well. So first, I will turn it over to Facilities Engineer Blake Shalide. Blake.
Thank you very much, Janine. Happy to be here. Thanks everyone for joining. Next slide, please. So energy efficiency plays a critical role in our state. It is the second largest resource in Oregon after hydropower, and Oregon has consistently met our increased demand for electricity by implementing energy efficiency strategies. The Northwest Power and Conservation Council reports that since 1978, the Pacific Northwest has produced about 7,000 average megawatts of savings through energy efficiency programs and improvements. The Northwest Power and Conservation Council's 7th Power Plan, published in 2016, concludes that cost-effective efficiency can meet a large amount of new load growth in the region, allowing Oregon to grow without needing significant new electricity resources. The plan calls on the region to develop new energy efficiency programs equivalent to acquiring 4,300 average megawatts of power by 2035. The integrated resource plans from Oregon's large electric utilities also identify energy efficiency as a key strategy that they will use to meet demand over their planning horizon. The Regional Conservation Progress Report to the Northwest Power and Conservation Council in September of 2020, however, demonstrates that there is significant cost-effective energy efficiency in the electric sector still available, but that the regional energy efficiency in the sector is on a downward trend. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk a little bit about energy codes and standards. Energy efficiency codes and standards have been and continue to be an important mechanism for achieving and locking in market-ready, cost-effective energy savings for our state and region. 30% of the cumulative energy savings in our region come from codes and standards policies that our states have put into place and continue to receive benefit from, like the gift that keeps on giving. This Burr section describes a little bit about what codes and standards are and the difference between them. They're generally complementary policies that cover energy consumption of homes and buildings and the equipment inside, but each have a slightly different scope. Energy codes are a part of the building code and provide requirements for new construction and renovations to improve the energy efficiency of buildings. Architects, engineers, builders, and contractors must design and construct buildings to meet or exceed energy code requirements. These codes are established and enforced by states or local jurisdictions, and Oregon has been a leader in the energy code since the 1970s, when the state was the first to adopt a statewide energy code, and continues to lead the way with codes that are more efficient than the most recent model codes and among the best in the country, as can be seen on the map, where dark green indicates more efficient. Energy efficiency standards, sometimes referred to as appliance standards, on the other hand, generally apply to equipment that is plugged in to a building and used by occupants. These plug loads and equipment are not generally covered by building codes and can represent as much as 30% of commercial and residential building use. Plug loads represent a significant portion of consumer energy consumption, and appliance standards support energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions to address this end use. Both the federal government and states have responsibility and authority for establishing standards. Overall, the federal government has set standards for more than 60 products across various categories of residential, commercial, and industrial appliances, lighting, and plumbing products. Federal standards were estimated to save consumers $80 billion nationally in 2015, and in total, established standards are estimated to save Oregonians on average $395 each year. States may also set energy efficiency standards for products that don't have a federal standard. Oregon first put standards in place in 2005, joining a list of just a few states to do so, and has continued to set standards legislatively over the years. Most recently, in August of 2020, Odo finalized rules for 11 new efficiency standards, most to become effective in 2022, and has also introduced a bill that is moving through the 2021 legislative session to place those standards into statute. So in summary, Oregon continues to be a national leader in both codes and standards, and Odo will continue to work with stakeholders to evaluate opportunities in these arenas to pursue additional energy savings, cost reductions, and greenhouse gas reduction for Oregon consumers. Next slide, please. Grid interactive efficient buildings, sometimes known as GEBs, are efficient, connected, and smart. They use advanced technologies like sensors, analytics, and controls to continually assess and optimize building operations. They're also flexible, which means you can optimize building energy loads better aligned with the grid needs, and may also include export of generated or stored power to the grid. This is part of the future of buildings and energy efficiency, being able to use the buildings as flexible assets for utilities to meet new energy demands. Grid interactive efficient buildings can also be part of an innovative strategy to include in local community energy and climate goals. For example, as part of a decarbonization strategy, these buildings integrate utility scale renewable energy, on-site renewables like rooftop PV, or both. Next slide, please. So this slide, we'll talk a little bit about the agriculture sector and its energy use in Oregon. As we all know, agriculture is an important part of Oregon's economy and is especially important to many local communities across the state. Oregon is the #1 producer in the US of hazelnuts, Christmas trees, and a number of different seeds. Oregon is well known for its agricultural diversity, and this diversity of crops, livestock, soils, climates, and production methods is reflected in how Oregon farms use energy. Oregon farmers and ranchers use energy for many purposes: to power tractors, other farm equipment in the field, to chill milk and freshly picked produce, to provide heat and light for greenhouses, to mechanically control weeds, pump water, and to run equipment like hop dryers, seed cleaners, and mint oil distilleries. This biennial energy report represents the first time that our agency has estimated the agricultural energy use in the state. It was challenging to find complete, accurate, embedded data sets for the various fuels used. ODO used a mix of state agency, utility, and industry trade association sources by fuel type to generate the estimates. For the numbers or estimates, ODO is confident that the relative size and fuel mix used in the comparative analysis, and will continue to refine the data in the future. ODO estimates that Oregon agriculture annual direct energy use is about 8,900 billion BTUs of energy, or 3 to 3.5% of total industrial sector energy use. Electricity is by far the largest direct energy type used in Oregon agriculture, driven by irrigation needs. Electricity also powers lighting, HVAC, and a variety of other equipment for farm and ranch operations. After electricity, the most common types of energy include diesel, natural gas, propane, and gasoline. For greenhouse gas emissions, according to the Oregon Global Warming Commission, the agricultural sector represents about 9% of Oregon's statewide greenhouse gas emissions. This total includes emissions primarily from waste streams like methane and nitrogen-based fertilizers for soil management. Some of the other energy-based emissions for this sector can be difficult to separate out and are often counted under a broader industrial profiles. This sector is distinct because emissions primarily come from methane and nitrous oxide versus carbon dioxide. Emissions from this sector have remained relatively consistent over time. Several programs offer technical and financial assistance to Oregon farms and ranches for energy efficiency projects, with most funding coming from electric and natural gas utility ratepayer funds. Our report provides a little more detail and highlights some of these programs. And then the last thing I'll mention is that ODO is in the process of being awarded a $100,000 Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Development Assistance Grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, known as a RETA grant. This funding will support 75% of the cost for energy audits for Oregon rural small businesses and agricultural producers statewide. With this support, ODO hopes that more Oregon rural businesses and farms can participate in an energy audit to identify potential cost and energy savings improvements. ODO is planning to launch the program in July and will fund energy audits through June 30th of 2023. We'll provide more information soon on our website, including eligibility and how to apply. And now I'll hand off to my colleague, Michael Friels, to discuss the concept of energy burden and how it applies in Oregon.
Thank you, Blake. Good afternoon. So in the 2020 Biennial Energy Report, we examined the cost of energy and burden for Oregon households. By collecting data from Fisher, Sheehan, and Colton's Home Energy Affordability Gap Research and collaborating with Oregon's Housing and Community Services, we discovered that in 2019, 25% or over 391,000 Oregon households were deemed home energy burdened. So how do we actually define energy burden? So if a household's spending is greater than 6% of their income, they are considered energy burdened. And when we talk about their spending, we're talking about costs, talking about their energy costs, such as energy bills on electricity, natural gas, and other home heating fuels. So this example we have here is an Oregon County map that is a section of the population. It's our households that are 200% or below the federal poverty level. So just looking at that, you can see it's graded by different colors. The red counties have the highest percentage of energy burdened households. So if you look at the percentages, half of those households are actually energy burdened. And please also note that those are predominantly rural communities within Oregon. So excitingly enough, the 2020 data has just been released, and it's interesting to see, in comparison to the 2019 data, that Oregon energy burdened households actually decreased in 2020. So it reduced from about 25% of total households in 2019 to 23% of total households in 2020. Unfortunately, even though the amount of households went down, the affordability gap actually increased for energy burdened households. So the affordability gap is the amount of funds used to actually pay those energy bills to the level of that 6%, what would actually be affordable, and what are they paying beyond that? So the gap is the difference there. So in 2019, it was about $554 on average for energy burdened households. That increased in 2020 to about $577 or $577 dollars. And so interesting enough, we'll have to see. I know there's a lot of safety nets and other kind of programs in place to help those communities. We'll have to look at that year by year and see if that changes, and we have additional challenges with that, with the global pandemic and other kind of far-reaching economic concerns. So the energy affordability gaps I talked about is that difference between what is affordable and what people are paying beyond that. If you add up all the energy burdened households across Oregon, that equals $289 million per year, the difference, or 8 times the federal funding Oregon actually receives for energy assistance. Next slide, please. So we also did some economic and demographic data kind of research and collected some county profile information. And this gives the people who are consumers or people who are interested to be able to take a look and look at their different counties and compare counties on some of this demographic and economic data. So our example here is Washington and Jackson County. So typically an urban and a rural county. So notice the difference in population, typical income, home age, and travel costs. So in the actual county profiles, there's a lot more information here, but we just wanted to highlight some of these things. And the bottom, the vehicle miles traveled, is an important one. If you compare urban to rural counties, urban counties do travel a lot more. And transportation is another energy burden aspect that we are spending a lot of time and focusing our analysis on. So like home energy burden, transportation is that difference of what the cost people are paying versus their income. And when we combine the true transportation burden and home energy burden, we get a more comprehensive look at the affordability of energy for Oregon households. And we'll do, Department of Energy is doing a variety of different research around this to try to identify what the problems are and potential solutions. So just as Blake was talking about advancing building codes to help with reducing costs within the built environment, we also promote and support energy efficiency and weatherization programs and hope this continued research informs policy and decision makers. If you are interested in learning more, I certainly recommend taking a look at Oregon Housing Community Services Affordable Housing Assessment interactive tool on their website. And a variety of different filters and great data and information, and it's a great resource. Housing and Community Services, as well as the PUC and the Oregon Department of Energy, published a 10-year plan to reduce the energy burden in Oregon affordable housing, and I certainly recommend that. The BUR has great information, and these other resources have wonderful supplementary information as well. And now Jessica Rikers will talk about zero emission transportation.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see so many people here for this presentation today. So I'm here to talk about transportation, in particular electric vehicles. There is a lot of information in the Biennial Energy Report about transportation fuel use and how that affects the climate. Transportation is the second largest sector of energy consumption in Oregon at 32%, and it emits 40% of our greenhouse gases, which is the largest proportion in the state. Like our electricity mix, the mix of transportation fuels used in Oregon is changing. More than 90% of our fuel consumption for transportation is petroleum-based gasoline and diesel. And because there are no crude oil resources or refineries in Oregon, we import almost all of our petroleum-based fuels. Over 90% of that fuel comes from refineries in Washington state, and more than half of that crude that feeds into those refineries is delivered by pipeline, rail, and truck from Canada, with other big resources coming from Alaska and the Bakken oil fields out of North Dakota. If you're interested, you can read more about this in the Energy One section of the report. In Oregon, we spend over $7 billion on transportation fuels. So increasing our use of more homegrown fuels like electricity provides an economic benefit to the state by retaining more of that $7 billion. Using electric vehicles, or EVs as they're often called, also can provide environmental benefits to Oregon as well. EVs are much more energy efficient than their internal combustion counterparts and often can travel more than 4 times further using the same amount of energy. EVs don't have tailpipe emissions, meaning less greenhouse gases, but also less harmful air pollutants that can have negative effects on people's health. But it is also important to look at the potential emissions from the generation of electricity used to fuel the EVs, or what is referred to as life cycle emissions. What are the emissions associated with the creation or extraction, transportation or transmission, and or refinement of that fuel? In 2019, over half of our electricity was generated from coal and natural gas, which emit greenhouse gases. But over 46% of our resources were from zero carbon resources like hydropower, solar, and wind. The good news is, no matter where you fuel a new EV in Oregon, you will reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. And in some parts of the state that rely on Bonneville Power Administration power, the electricity generated can be upwards of 95% clean, meaning you really get a bang for your buck. Better news is, our electricity mix has been and will continue to get cleaner. So EV drivers will contribute fewer and fewer emissions over time without them needing to do anything. You can read more about this in our technology review sections about electric vehicles, electric vehicle chargers, and also about fuel cell electric vehicles, which are known as hydrogen vehicles. And all of this serves as foundational material for the policy briefs which are in the report. There are several transportation-focused policy briefs, including information on fuel efficiency technologies for the freight sector and what low or no carbon fuels would be best suited for different types of medium-duty and heavy-duty trucks. But the policy brief I'm covering today is about how electric utilities will manage increasing numbers of EVs on their systems. More and more Oregonians and Oregon businesses are adopting EVs every year, and electric utilities will need to manage this new demand on their systems. As you can see from the chart on the right, utilities will need to manage, you can see from the chart on the right that it's not that different of an electricity load for an EV compared to other household appliances, falling somewhere between a water heater and an air conditioner. So in fact, the challenge is not about how much electricity we need to power EVs, but more about when and where EVs are charging. Most EVs charge overnight, often plugging in when the owner arrives home, which adds significant electricity use, often at the time of highest overall electricity demand. Most EVs can be scheduled to start charging at a later time, and often these vehicles will not need to be charged the entire evening to meet the driver's needs. So utilities are looking at ways to stagger charging events to reduce the initial demand of all vehicles starting to charge at the same time. And this could be different rates to encourage off-peak charging or even communication between the EV and the electric utility to manage when and how fast the vehicle charges. There are also challenges to where EVs charge on the grid. One or even a few EVs on the system are not usually a challenge, but often we see that EVs are contagious. Where one pops up, others tend to pop up in the same area. And this can put pressure on the local distribution system, in particular transformers, which may not be able to accommodate multiple vehicles charging at the same time, especially at times of high electricity demand. And utilities are seeing this pattern and planning to do routine upgrades and improvements in advance of the need. In fact, the Oregon Department of Energy has worked with a few utilities in a pilot program to identify where EVs are charging on their systems so that they can better plan for those EVs. As you can see, All these portions of our biennial energy report combine to tell the whole energy story, from data on consumption to how energy technologies and systems work, to what policy options are being discussed today that will help Oregon better conserve energy and transition into a cleaner, more cost-effective energy future. And with that, I'll turn it back to Janine.
Thank you, Jessica, Michael, and Blake. Before we move on to our next question for the audience, I will pause and see if Casey has any questions for Jessica, Michael, and Blake on this material. And I know there's been some Q&A back and forth in writing as well.
Yeah, such great questions. So I'll start with, luckily we have some great folks from our efficiency team here. So with the emergence of the power plan coming out soon, and we saw in the chart that we saw less savings in energy efficiency. So kind of a two-for-one question here. You know, do we know if efficiency is all used up? Have we used the easy stuff? Is there still efficiency to be had? And any indications with the power plan that we know so far how it's going and how efficiency might be addressed in the future?
Stephanie, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So the upcoming power plan notes that there still is a lot of potential to continue meeting load growth with energy efficiency. So it's not that there is no longer an opportunity for energy efficiency, but there's a kind of a complex network of reasons why we're seeing the energy savings decrease and anticipated savings decrease in the coming years. And one of those is that our renewable energy options are becoming more and more cost effective. And so sometimes by comparison, those options are preferable over some energy efficiency projects. And in part that's due to some value analysis, because there's some non-cost and non-energy benefits like reduction of energy burden, resilience, capacity issues that just aren't really factored into a cost effectiveness equation. And then, you know, we also see that, you know, Oregon has been working on energy efficiency for quite a while, and a lot of the people who are poised to take action on that front already have. And so finding ways to assist people who have barriers to participation in energy efficiency programs is going to be important to continuing the energy efficiency work in the state.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Casey, any other questions?
I'll just note, we had a couple questions come in about all the data, Michael, that you went through, and thank you for that. So I'm going to include a link to our section in the report with those data sets. And Michael, just one question there. Was LIHEAP data included in this analysis, and was that looked at per household or per capita?
So we do, I don't have it for 2020 yet, but for 2019, looking at that LIHEAP data, yes. So if you look at, we have it at kind of a broad stroke, so the macro level of the gross LIHEAP amount of money that we received at $35 million. And then if you take that and you basically look at all the different households that were actually helped along the way, let's see, I'm trying to remember, it was about 374,000 different households received some level of assistance. So it's quite a few. And so, I mean, I can just do that calculation and say that, you know, that's $95 a household, but obviously that's probably not accurate. Obviously, that's just an average. And so we could take a look at and talk to Housing and Community Services and get some greater detail on kind of how their allocation is and what numbers they're seeing. So I can look at it at a macro level and look at those numbers, but I'm sure vetting it through them and getting a more accurate look of what they're actually seeing and how they're distributing those funds, we could probably give you a better idea of those numbers.
Thanks, and I'll also include a link in the chat here with the direct website for our sister agency who we've been working with and discussing weatherization, heating assistance, and other work around energy burden and housing.
Thanks, Casey. Michael, while we have you, I see one more question on LIHEAP. Could the funds be used for weatherization to reduce the need for heat? And I'll just preface, caveat Michael's answer, which he may or may not know, because Odo is not the agency that distributes LIHEAP funding. That's Oregon Housing and Community Services. So if he says we have to get back to you, that's why. But now I've set you up, Michael.
Yes, of course. So thank you. I don't know all the specific rules of LIHEAP. I think it is directly for energy assistance. I don't know if it can be used for weatherization. I assume those CAP agencies have those programs, but I don't know how those funding can be used directly to help, what level of assistance, whether it has to be direct funds for a utility bill or it can be some investment in improving the home. Obviously, there's a variety of weatherization programs, and it might just be a different program that can provide that service. It's not necessarily directly LIHEAP funds, but other weatherization services that OHCS provides. But yeah, we can certainly look into that and get some greater detail and clarity there.
Great, thank you. So Mr. Proudfoot, who's asked the question, if we can find the answer before the end of the webinar, we'll put it in the Q&A box. Otherwise, feel free to follow up with a note to askenergy@oregon.gov, and we will get an answer for you. Hey, Casey, anything else?
I think we can continue. Thank you.
All right. So Jenny, now we are on our last, no, unfortunately, it's not our last question for you. We have a lot more questions, but one additional question for the audience. If you could choose one primary energy area to focus more public dollars, which would you choose? So please go ahead and fill out the poll. Okay, just giving folks a minute to fill out this poll about where you would focus public dollars if you were the ruler of public dollars, if you were the legislature. Is there an area of funding that is on this list that you would want to put more money towards, or is there something else? If so, feel free to add your answer in the chart. And again, don't forget to hit the submit button after you make your selection. All right, there we go. We have some fans of investing in clean transportation and incentives, rebates and grants. So thank you so much for filling that out. It's really helpful to know where people think some of this funding should go. Okay, and if you advance to the next slide, please, Jenny. We have a few more questions that we would like to ask of our audience. And after that, we will likely have some additional time for Q&A, so feel free to keep those questions coming. And we can also experiment with figuring out how to let people ask their questions live if they'd like. So, questions for you before we do this. We really appreciate your participation today and your candid feedback. And these are just a few more questions before we close out the webinar. These questions are open-ended and you'll have 256 characters for your response. So if there isn't enough room or you run out of time, please feel free to use the chat or follow up with us after the webinar. So you're going to have 5 minutes to fill this out. First question, what future webinar topics would you be interested in attending? Do you want to know more about transportation? Would you attend one of those webinars focused entirely on technology reviews? Is history your thing, like it is mine? Do you want to go have a deep dive on the history of energy in Oregon? So think about if there are other future webinar topics that you'd be interested in attending. Next, what resources do you need from your Department of Energy? So we are here to serve Oregonians. You saw our mission involves energy education, but also helping with the transition to a clean energy future. What resources do you need either as an individual, for your organization, for your community, that the Department of Energy can help with? Next, what questions do you have about energy or your choices in energy? So maybe you've read all 612 pages of the Biennial Energy Report and you still have questions about energy in Oregon, and there's something you'd really like us to focus on for the 2022 report. Please let us know if there are additional questions that you have. And then finally, does your organization or an organization that you are involved with have events or venues where you would like the Oregon Department of Energy to participate or present? And if that is the case, please let us know the organization and what topics would be of interest. And again, if you don't have enough room, feel free to send us an email at askenergy@oregon.gov or put question in the Q&A or put something in the chat. It looks like we're about halfway through our time here for answering this question. So I will be quiet and give you a little bit of time to think. All right, I know some people are still answering the questions. And as you're doing that, I'll just say thank you again so much for joining us. We hope it was as useful for you as it was for us. Really appreciated the feedback on the polling questions. Please do stay tuned to our website for information on future webinars. And of course, feel free to dive into the report in the meantime on our website. And I know we've asked a lot of you this afternoon in terms of questions, but as you click to leave the meeting this afternoon, you're going to see one more very short survey pop up. And if you can take an additional minute to respond, it will help us improve our webinars going forward. So while people are still filling this out, it looks like we have a little more time before we wrap up at 5. And so folks are welcome to stay on the line and ask questions of our experts live. I think the way that we will do this is if you would like to ask a question, please indicate in the chat to all the panelists or in the Q&A that you'd like to ask a question, and our host, Stacy, can take you off mute and let you ask your question, which she will do one at a time and sort of give you a heads up that she's going to give you that opportunity. So we'll just give folks a couple more seconds to wrap up this poll, and then we will go to free-for-all live Q&A.
And just a reminder, you can select to and everyone to either note your question or to request to come off mute.
Or it's almost 5 o'clock on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. So if you want to go enjoy the sun, that's okay too. Casey, did you see a question come up?
Yeah, I do have one question. Josh, if you'd like to come off mute, I think we can have your question for our audience. I will note we don't have our full team on the call today, but a lot of our groups, so we can talk through your interest and get that question going.
Oh, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, we can.
We can.
Great. Sorry, I was looking for the control. It's apparently in your hands. Hydrogen. I just wanted to hear your take on that for serving industrial loads as a heat source. It seems like the future of renewable hydrogen is really heavy duty vehicles and then industrial heat. And I'm wondering kind of how far along the discussion is about that inside of Odo. I mean, this is a very informal question, but since we work on climate all day long, it's front and center in our face here. And I also saw a really cool project. I think it's a bizarre way to get at it, but a cement kiln in California that is using wind power for electrolysis to produce their hydrogen, by which they're burning down and the lime into cement. So they're trying to be low carbon cement. I think there's other ways to do that, but that's a great example of displacing other thermal energy sources. So just wondering how big a deal that is, how much discussion that's getting or attention that's getting inside of Odo, or is that more of a DQ type thing? Thanks.
Great question, Josh. And I see Jessica has come off mute, so I think she's got an answer.
Thanks. Good question, Josh, actually, and timely as well. There was a bill that has passed out of both houses of the legislature. I don't know what day it was because time has no meaning anymore to me, but it's been the last week. Senate Bill 333. And this bill actually assigns to Odo a study on power to gas. So the creation of hydrogen that can be used across the energy sectors. You pointed out a lot of really good options. It can be used as a fuel for transportation or fueling for heat purposes, or also to generate electricity. So Odo will be working on that study. It's meant to be a review of sort of the barriers and challenges to power to gas, hydrogen, and what sort of opportunities might exist in the state for that resource. And I want to flag one other thing that our sister agency is doing. ODOT is conducting a study later this year on hydrogen fueling infrastructure for fuel cell electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. So that will be started up and due to come out in October. And if you want to know more about power to gas, if anybody's interested, we did produce 2 pieces of information in the biennial energy report about it. One is an Energy 101 sort of background, what is it, how does it work, and then a policy brief that's sort of maybe the first step toward the future study that we'll be working on power to gas. So that that study, by the way, that I mentioned is due in September of next year. So just a little over a year.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you.
All right, Casey, do you see anybody else who wants to ask a live question?
I'm catching up. Such a great response from folks and some really interesting technical questions, problem-solving questions. I have one that maybe we can talk about not only a specific technology, but across, what Oregon Department of Energy is working on. And when we think about zero emissions, maybe this is in vehicles and buildings, what does the role of Odo play there? How do we address that, not only in our agency, but maybe across the state? Some strategies and thoughts there connected to all these sectors and our eventual goal.
Well, thanks, Casey. I would be happy to take a shot at that one and then maybe turn it over to Maya if she has anything to add. But the Department of Energy actually, the Oregon Department of Energy put together a report back in May of last year, an implementation report for the governor's climate change executive order 20-04. And that executive order came out and really asked agencies to do a few specific things. There were some specific directives to the Oregon Department of Energy, Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Transportation, and some other agencies. And then it also asked agencies to look at their existing authority and think about what they could do to accelerate the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and to expedite any agency processes that could reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the Oregon Department of Energy put together an implementation report that I will put in the chat that outlines many ways that we are working in the energy sector to reduce emissions. And there are a lot of agencies around the state working to reduce emissions. Department of Environmental Quality has a cap and reduce program that was, I think, from the executive order. The Department of Transportation is working on emissions, working to coordinate with a number of state agencies, including ours, to reduce emissions from the transportation sector. And I like to think about the Oregon Department of Energy as the solutions agency. We don't necessarily regulate greenhouse gas emissions, except in a very small way, but we offer solutions. Renewable energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable transportation are the ways that this state is going to be able to reduce emissions, and we have programs on all of those things. And with that, I will ask Maya if she has anything she'd like to add there.
Thanks, Janine, and thanks so much for the question. Building on top of what Janine noted, ODO will actually be supporting the Greenhouse Gas Commission on developing, what we're calling the TIGGER plan. It's the Transformational Integrated Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction Plan. So quite a mouthful there, but it is a big project. It's going to be occurring over the next 1 to 2 years, and the goal of that plan is to help advise the governor and the legislature and others on potential strategies that can help us achieve the ambitious and important greenhouse gas reduction goals. But at the same time, the goal of the plan is to help think about strategies that also are going to help Oregon's economy grow and enhance equity and quality of life for people across the state. So the plan will be identifying additional actions beyond those noted in Executive Order 2004 across the state to help reduce emissions and sequester carbon dioxide. And in particular, it will provide analyses on the cost per ton of emissions reductions actions and some information on co-benefits related to health, the economy, and equity. So look out for more information on that from the commission and more materials as they unfold. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Maya. Okay, last chance for live questions. Casey, do you see any other ones?
I'll just note that I do see one in here about some ongoing legislation, and maybe we can talk specifically about some resources to support those conversations related to offshore wind.
Sure, maybe that's another one that I would invite Jessica or John to jump in on, because I know there's been legislative conversations about offshore wind, and as there's a bill that would require the Department of Energy to do a study on hydrogen, there's also one making its way through the process to require us to convene some people to think about offshore wind off Oregon's coast, where there is an excellent resource, but nothing built yet. Jessica or John or
Casey, I cannot find the question in the Q&A. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So we have a comment from Kathy for offshore wind related to HB 3375.
Oh, I apologize, but I'm not finding it. But Kathy, I think we could get your question answered by the person who's leading up that work, who's not on the call right now. So Casey, if you could help me with that, I will get that over to Jason and he can respond to Kathy directly.
Yeah, and I'm also going to put a link into our policy briefing on offshore wind that is also in the report that provides a good overview of some discussions around cost benefits, some great graphics and mapping that may be a really good primer for some of those conversations. Well, I think with that, that is all of the major questions we have. So I'll just open it back up to our speakers, presenters one more time. If there's anything you didn't get to answer or you want to follow up on the Q&A or the chat.
I'll add just a couple things, and John, I'll give you a heads up that I think it'd be good if you could mention the potential study around community renewables. But I mentioned the power to gas study that is going to the governor's desk for signature soon. There's also, as mentioned, an offshore wind study that's working its way through the legislature and quite possibly could also be signed into law here this session. There also passed out of both houses and on its way to the governor is a bill for us to conduct a literature review and assessment for regional transmission operator, what the benefits of that would be in the state of Oregon. That report will be due December 31st of this year. So there's more work coming on that. Also, the agency is putting together the biennial zero emission vehicle report, which is due out on September 15th of this year. So if you're interested in some of the discussion on electric vehicles earlier, that report will be coming out in mid-September, and we'll have a lot more information on electric vehicle adoption in the state, what some of the barriers are, and whether we will achieve some of the goals that have been set on electric vehicle adoption for the light duty sector. So more to come on that. And then maybe, John, you could give like a quick review of that community renewable bill that's passing through the study that's on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jessica. So as part of the Omnibus 2021 bill, there is a study on small-scale renewable energy projects that would require the Oregon Department of Energy to convene a work group to examine opportunities and barriers to the development of small-scale renewable energy and community-based renewable energy projects. So they would look into issues such as barriers to project development, economic benefits of small-scale renewable energy projects, potential contributions of projects to resilience, and other topics.
All right, thanks, Jessica and John. And if there's no one else who wants to come off mute and ask a question, then we can wrap up our webinar for this afternoon. Again, I really want to thank everyone who took 2 hours to learn more about energy, hear more about our biennial energy report, and share your feedback and your opinions about energy in Oregon. It was really valuable for us to be able to hear from you. And as a reminder, we'll have one more set of questions for you as you click to leave the meeting. It should just take a second, but we really do appreciate your feedback so that we can improve our webinars and our information sharing going forward. I know there was some discussion in the chat about the importance of energy education, and I couldn't agree more. It's a key part of what the Department of Energy does. And I'd like to thank the Oregon Department of Energy team for your presentations this afternoon and for the hard work that you do and your expertise. And to especially to Stacy for being our host, and Jenny for running the slideshow, and Casey for monitoring the Q&A, and everybody else that I forgot. So with that, we'll sign off. Thanks so much, everyone.